being with us, Congressman.
Great to be with you.
So I know it's a tough time. There's a lot of decisions to be made. One of them has to do with this tax cut issue. Why did you decide to sign on to this letter, as well as 30 of your other Democratic colleagues saying, you know what, we need to extend them for everybody at this point?
Well, I think it's important to also clarify that the letter says it's a temporary extension for everybody. We all believe that the middle-class tax cuts for people $250,000 or less should be extended, and that should be done permanently. But given the still fragile state of the economy, although we've seen 8 months of positive job growth, it's still fairly fragile. We believe there should be at least a short-term extension of all tax cuts looking at a year or two. Hopefully it's going to be a compromise position between what we've seen kind of entrenched positions on both sides. I think it's important we make sure that we have tax cuts for middle-class Americans from $250 and less, that goes forward. But we certainly believe that we could have a short-term extension of the other tax cuts until we see signs that the economy is definitely getting much healthier.
So
we're seeing signs now, but it needs to go further.
Put on that? Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years when you talk about temporarily extending it for everybody? What would be the years?
Well, we're looking at 1 to 2 years, and we also believe that it needs to be paid for, that whenever you're talking about any of these kind of tax cuts, you need to pay for it. We do have pay-fors identified in the letter, but it would be a short-term extension, 1 to 2 years, something that we need to talk about.
Is it an election year move? I mean, nobody wants to be in a campaign ad from their opponent saying, hey, I voted to raise taxes.
Well, I think this is just good, sound policy, is that as the economy is slowly recovering, this is not the time to be raising taxes on anybody. And I think you'll find agreement from most economists that that makes sense not to do that. Folks in the higher income brackets account for a large percentage of consumer spending. 70% of the economy is consumer spending. Right now, demand is still very soft on the consumer side. We want to make sure consumers are still out there spending, creating demand. Also from the investment side. And there are parts of the tax cuts that are important, and I believe for capital gains and dividends, dividend rates shouldn't be going up. And this is a discussion that needs to be part of an overall deficit reduction strategy that needs to be laid out over the next year. We've got a deficit reduction commission that's going to be coming back later this year with a plan in order to reduce the deficit. Revenue may be part of it. This should be part of that discussion in a very comprehensive way next year. That is the best way to proceed.
I just want to ask you about this because some of the polling shows that a lot of people think that it's a good idea. More than 50% in some of the latest polling think it's a good idea to let taxes expire for the wealthiest income earners. So if I'm sitting at home right now, I'm struggling to make ends meet, struggling to put my kids through college. What is your rationale, if you're speaking to me, to say it's a good idea to extend tax cuts for everyone, including the wealthiest income earners?
Right. Well, first off, let's make absolutely clear that definitely we need to have tax cuts for middle-class Americans, middle-income Americans. We cannot hold that hostage. That has to happen, and it has to happen very quickly. But in order to help families, we also have to make sure that this economy is growing. We've had 8 months of positive job growth. We need to continue to go. We need to create jobs. And when we're in this still very fragile environment, it's best, in my belief and other colleagues of mine, it's best not to raise any taxes until we start getting on a much sounder footing in the economy. That's going to help everybody in the economy. But let me be perfectly clear. We definitely have to make sure we extend those tax cuts for folks making $250 or less.
Right.
And I just hope Congress, we don't see... Right now, we've got gridlock here in Congress. We've got sides digging their heels in. I think it is wrong. I think what the American people really want to see is Congress coming together and having a compromise, making sure we're helping middle-class Americans, and also making sure that we're helping the economy.
Right.
This should not be about partisan politics on both sides.
I'm sorry to talk over you. I just want to make sure people understand. If something is not introduced, if legislation is not introduced, if there is not some agreement, the bottom line is it's the equivalent of a tax hike, right? Because these Bush tax cuts are set to expire. So that means they're going to expire for the middle class as well if you guys don't take action.
That's right. That's why we need to take action, because the rates will go up if we do not take action. That's why we cannot let partisan gridlock politics prevent that from happening for middle-class Americans. And that's why it's important, I think, to stake out some compromise positions that we can do what's good for the economy, but most importantly, do what's good for middle-class Americans, and that's make sure that these tax rates continue in the future and are not raised.
So have you got any indication from House Speaker Pelosi that she's going to listen to you guys, that some introduction of legislation talking about an expansion of these tax cuts for everybody will happen?
Well, right now, what I'm hearing from both sides is both sides aren't really willing to negotiate one way or the other, and that has me very nervous that we won't do anything by the year end. We're going to have gridlock politics. That is very frustrating. We can't let partisanship politics on both sides stymie what is very important to middle-class Americans, and that's to make sure that they don't see their taxes go up. That's why I think it's very important for us to stake out some middle position, to try to be a centrist here, find some sort of common ground where we can bring both sides together in order to solve a problem and make sure that middle-class Americans get the tax cut that they deserve, but also make sure the economy continues to get healthier every single month as we've seen the last 8 months, but it has to continue going forward. So I think we are staking out that middle position, and we're hoping we don't have gridlock and we can accomplish something that's so important for the American people.
Well, we'll see if your party's leaders are listening to you. Congressman Gary Peters, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And, I mean, we've been talking about this anger within the voters and, a lot of these protest votes almost taking place in these primaries across the country. This is what frustrates people so much, that if nobody can sort of give a little bit on their position, nothing's going to happen and everyone's going to see a hike.
Right. And this was 2 years